Now, for an 8 marks question, this is the different steps that you need to take. Now, if you look very carefully, even a simple description will actually get you the 1 to 2 marks. That means you just describe anything that you know that comes to your mind, anything. So the idea here is not to just leave the question blank. As long as you're able to describe something, and then later we look at the sample, what is the meaning of describing. Now, in an 8-mark question, you are supposed to give 2 factors, if possible. All right. Now, if you are able to just identify the factors or describe the factors, you would already have gotten the 4 marks. Okay, so this is literally about recalling, okay, or literally just recap of the important points. Now, you need to aim for an 8-mark question is you need to get at least a 7 to 8 marks, because this would be the easier part of writing the essay. Okay, and when we talk about explaining, when we say explain, there must be a very clear method of writing. So some of you are very familiar with Peel. Okay, point examples, explain the examples and the link, or some of you will be quite familiar with the what, how, and why. Okay, now as long as you have a main point, as long as you have examples, as long as you have like a link, okay, that would actually be an explanation. So the link is to actually use the examples to answer the question. Okay, now moving on, a 12-mark question would demand definitely slightly more. All right, it is again a statement. So for B question or 12-mark question, it is what we call a statement, and you have to answer in 2 paragraphs, minus the conclusion, but it is 2 paragraphs. So you have a paragraph 1 and you have a paragraph 2. Okay, and usually it is a yes no. Most of the time there is a statement that you have to agree as well as disagree. Okay, and you would have gotten 10 marks already. Now, for you to get 11 to 12 marks is actually to argue your way or to decide what we call a balanced conclusion. A balanced conclusion would actually mean, for example, do you agree more or would you disagree more? Or maybe, just maybe, for that particular history question, it is actually both sides. There is no clear, definite answer. That means you can actually say that, oh, I agree and I disagree, and I feel that it is both factors are the one that actually sort of play a part. All right. Very rare for you to sit at the fence, but it is possible. Okay. Okay, hello. So today we're going to look at the 2017 O-level paper, and if you look very carefully, it is a recap of our Sec 3 content. Okay, and this is literally the beginning of the impact of World War I. Now, I hope you remember about how to answer 8-mark questions. If not, just go to the beginning of the video. Now, when we say explain why the terms of the Treaty of Versailles were unpopular, the first thing that you need to do is, of course, we need to unpack what is Treaty of Versailles, okay? And you have to recap what were the terms of the Treaty of Versailles. Now, there are many terms of the Treaty of Versailles, but what we do is we pick the best 2 or the 2 that you are very familiar with. Now, another key idea is why were they unpopular? So they were unpopular because it made the Germans very angry. It also was unpopular because maybe the impact of the Treaty of Versailles. So you have to take note of what is key in addressing these 2 main things that were unpopular about the Treaty of Versailles, and then you link it back to what were the terms. Now, what if you forget about the terms? Then you must remember some things, like reparations, for example, would be very easy, loss of land, as well as humiliation. Humiliation that came about from the Treaty of Versailles. There is no easy way for you to sort of fluff your way, because this particular question requires you to know specific terms. Okay? All right, now going back to the B question, all right, the League of Nations failed to provide collective security in the 1920s. How far do you agree with this statement? Again, this question requires you to look at a yes or no. All right, so you must answer a yes or no. Again, conclusion is in the event that you do have the time. Okay, now for this, there are two things that are very important. First, you need to remember what is the League of Nations. Okay, what were the objectives of the League of Nations? And at the same time, you need to be very careful about the year. Now, they gave you a year in the 1920s, so you need to actually remember that it is between 1920s all the way to maybe 1929. So your examples must be specific that comes from this particular time period, which means you have to go back and recap to the textbook and to look at the specific examples that were given. All right, later on there will be a link to the website to actually show you what were the success as well as what were the failures of League of Nations during this period. Now, the other thing that you need to pay attention is what is the meaning of collective security. Collective security here means actually peace. Peace towards the world, the very fact that they had just recovered from World War One. So why was collective security needed? Okay, now if let's say you're going to actually start writing a conclusion, I think you have to weigh. Okay, weighing is very important. Do you think that League of Nations failed as a whole during this 1920s to 1929, or was the League of Nations actually had pockets of success? So if you remembered about the League of Nations, the very fact that we had World War II sort of tells you that, you know, the League of Nations was a complete failure. The role of appeasement, the role of the big three didn't actually step forward to stop World War II. All right, so this is quite an easy conclusion where you look at the failure more in comparison to the success. Okay, so there is an example of this particular essay online. I will give the link below. All right, the next question is, of course, the set 4 topic, which is on Cold War. All right, so specifically when we look at Cold War, they can actually ask you about reasons for Cold War. They can also ask you about specifically about the case studies that we have learned. Okay, so we have learned things about Korea, we have learned things about Cuban Missile Crisis. And at the same time, they can also include things that is about end of Cold War. So that is why if you decide to do a question on Cold War, you need to know all aspects of Cold War. At the end of the day, it is your confidence level and how much you have sort of prepped the question, okay, or sorry, prep the content. All right, so now this is again the 8 marks question, and the 8 marks question that requires you to have an explanation. It will definitely be level 3. Okay, and how do you get the 5 to 8 marks? Remember, 5 to 6 is for 1 factor, as well as 7 to 8 marks, it is for 2 factors. Okay, now let's take a look at the question. Explain. So that is why you need to have your why, correct? Explain why the US became involved in the Korean War. All right, so it is really about reasons. I'm looking at reasons. Okay, so one of the things that you really need is to know also the roles of other countries. Okay, but specifically, what was USA's role, right? Um, and it can also be very targeted. Okay, so that means a possible question that is not like this. It could be, what is the role of China? Why did China become involved? Why did Soviet Union become involved? So these are the different types of questions. Okay, so one of the reasons why USA was involved is definitely because they wanted to okay, so remember about USA and remember about United Nations. Okay, so we've discussed a little bit about United Nations, but what was the role of United Nations in ensuring world peace? Agree? All right. And USA became involved in the Korean War because one, they wanted to maintain legitimacy. Now, what is the meaning of legitimacy? That means it is the a right, okay, to sort of I guess support, that would be another word. Okay, maintain legitimacy, maintain support towards the new United Nation. Because if United Nation specifically meant that it could create peace, then definitely they needed to ensure that whatever the actions would actually be supported. Now, United Nations was formed in 24 October 1945, correct? And the Korean War is between 1950 to 1953. All right, okay, so moving on. Um, so they need to maintain the legitimacy towards the new United Nation, and specifically because they saw that North Korea invading South Korea, it was an illegal act. It was a defiance towards international law. And to make United Nation, I guess, important towards all the other countries, okay, and to make, I guess, the United Nations recognized, they needed to do something, okay. Now, the other thing is, of course, the most common one, all right, would be USA was involved because they wanted to stop communism. Agree? All right, and it was literally because specifically they needed to stop the spread of communism. And we are talking about a little bit of context that you must remember. Okay, so while United Nations was actually, I guess, set up in 1945, okay, and the war was between 1950 to 1953. That is why I was also telling you about the roles of other countries, and specifically, I really meant China. Now, why was China very important? Because specifically, China in 1949, they were communist. So now the very fact that USA had to deal with not only Soviet Union, but a massive China that was communist. So they needed to stop the spread of communism in North Korea, and also to save South Korea, because if not, then the communism would spread, and literally one of the three big, I guess, East Asian countries could literally come together, which is Soviet Union plus China. I consider Soviet Union as is part of East Asia as well, right? As well as Korea, as well as a possible Japan. Okay, so one of the most important things and the main aim is definitely to stop the spreading of communism in North Korea because of China's communism. Okay, so this is just a rough guide for you to remember certain things. All right, now moving on. So again, when you have questions that is how far, it is really about ensuring that you have two sides of everything. Okay, and definitely it is to ensure that you are able to reach at least, we're talking about a level 3. Okay, and a level 3 meaning that you're able to explain a yes and a no. Again, the keyword is explain. It is not about how many or how much you can write or how much you can remember actually. Examples are important. Concrete examples are important, but at the same time, it's how the examples answer the question. So these are things that you need to sort of start gearing, whether you're going to choose your Sec 3 massive content or your Sec 4 massive content. Okay? Now, for this particular question, of course, you need to specifically know what is containment. Correct? So it goes back to the idea about stopping communism, right? Okay, it is about ensuring that communism does not spread, and literally it is using any methods necessary. Okay, and specifically I want you to take note about the word fail. So straight away you must toggle your mind. Okay, where were examples to actually show that communism failed, and where were the examples to show that communism did not fail? So one of the most important or the biggest failure would definitely be um, for students who do not recognize that they need to address the word failed. Okay, the other sort of failure that the students did not do is, of course, to look at Europe. That means all your examples must come from this particular continent, and it is the actions of what US did, okay, and what obviously Soviet Union did. So Europe, your examples must literally come from Europe, or your case studies must literally come from Europe. Okay, all right, and you must make sure that when it is failed, what were the consequences? And what were examples that didn't show failure? What were the examples that show success? Okay, and in a conclusion, of course, this is very interesting. If you do have that time to really look at conclusion, you're going to look at specifically at the end of the day. Do you think that stopping communism in Europe was a success? Or do you think it was more of a failure? There is no right and wrong answer, seriously, to this. Okay, it is about, at the end of the day, how you argue. So I may have one perspective because this is how I see the thing, but if you're able to argue your way, it is fine. Okay, so this is for students who are really confident about such questions. Now, if we are not, then let's aim for us to have that 7 to 8 marks. Remember, I was telling you that we need to be very strategic in how many marks that we need to get for essay and the time that we actually have. All right? All right. So if let's say you are agreeing, okay, that the US policy of containment is a failure, then you must always remember all the case studies. So we are looking at countries that were taken or that adopted communism. So we're talking about Romania, Bulgaria. There was, of course, the most important I would say is East Germany. And Soviet Union carved out a political and economic sphere. So containment was a failure because Stalin expanded into Eastern Europe, and there was no way that USA could actually stop, because that would literally mean a war, a conflict, right? And I think focused your answer specifically on what is happening in East Germany, how East Germany is literally closed, boarded down. You can talk about the Berlin Wall itself, all right? You can talk about the Berlin Wall, how you can talk about the Iron Curtain. So all these are examples to agree that USA's policy of containment, no matter whatever it was, failed. Okay, now the next part is really about looking at disagree. Correct, and we are looking at US policy of containment was a success. Okay, so why was it a success? Because of these two initiatives. There was the Marshall Plan, there was the Nato. All right, and specifically we are talking about what is Marshall Plan. So you need to know a little bit about Marshall Plan. Okay, you need to know specifically that Marshall Plan was to prevent countries to adopt communism by offering obviously money. Okay, and when countries recover, it is really continuous dependent on USA. So obviously containment was a success. Right, now NATO. Now NATO is of course the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. It is a military alliance, and the whole idea is to stop the spread of communism militarily. I think the idea is really after after Berlin blockade. All right, then you realize that Europe needed a permanent, okay, I think you could probably also add in this, it is a permanent military support. So when you have a permanent military support, you are able to be this beacon of hope. You're able to stop the spread of communism. And when you stop the spread of communism, is literally to show that containment is a success, and countries were able to continue surviving without without being attacked or approached by communist Soviet Union. Okay, and the reason is because there are many. Okay, so if this is a country, right, there are literally parties in it. Okay, there's Democratic Party. There could be single parties. Okay, there could be people who still believed in communism. So it is really always a struggle, and hence that is why America always needed a permanent solution to maintain Europe. Okay, so if you're going to use or if you're going to do Cold War questions, then you must really know your content very, very well. Okay, that's all for now. Thank you.